Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sculpture 3, our balsa foam project. In this one, we are going to be using material that industrial designers use when they start coming up with 3D models. So this one is kind of based on a vehicle, but I need you to kind of open your mind that on what a vehicle is, because it can be more than just like a car or a truck. Okay. As a designer, some of the things that we kind of struggle with sometimes as artists as well is just coming up with some original ideas. Because if you want to kind of make it in the world of design, you have to be able to um, come up with things that haven't really been thought of before. You just can't jump online, see somebody else's idea, take it, and then run with it as if it's your own idea and kind of expect to be paid for that. You'd be sued for that, kind of instead. So this is kind of part of that. If you run through the whole process and decide that you still want to kind of make, like a 1967, Thunderbird or something like that, then that's fine. But I want you still, as a designer, because it's our class and there's a whole field of design that you can kind of get into as a career. We're still going to kind of go through this process. So once you get your worksheet out, we're going to kind of run through this. You can skip the class ideas, and we'll just focus on your ideas. So it says types of vehicles you can think of. So if you can, kind of pause this, so then you can run through your own ideas, and then you can kind of watch it. So I can give you the ideas as well to help complement your ideas. Okay. So it says types of vehicles you can think of. Again, everybody always kind of does the cars and the trucks, but there's a whole world out there. You can think of the military. You can think of like tanks and battleships. You can think of video games that you play, and there's certain kind of cars, that might be designed on there. You can think of things that are science fiction based. You can think of spaceships. You can think of battleships. You can think of shuttles. There are hundreds upon hundreds of different kinds of vehicles you can do. You can think about, a Platteville. You can think about ATVs and UTVs. You can think about boats, fishing boats, submarines. You can think of, again, think of space. You have like Land Rovers, or not Land Rovers, but you have the Mars rover. Just tons and tons and tons of ideas that you can kind of add into that. Okay. Second one is vehicles from cartoons or movies. Same thing. Think about some of the James Bond movies. How they might have some kind of interesting twists to that. Think of cartoons. Even like children's cartoons, where you might have to have like animals who are like living, like Zootopia, if you remember that movie. What kind of vehicles they would drive based upon their body type. How would an elephant's vehicle look different than a giraffe's vehicle? So if you were an illustrator for a children's book, same thing. You'd have to figure out if a bunch of dogs were living in a community, they were driving around, what would those cars look like, kind of thing. So same thing with there were mice, what would theirs look like? Next one, direct life experience with a type of vehicle. Again, think of your own, pause it, and then kind of play this. Um, Direct life experience with the vehicle. I mean, this doesn't mean like a car crash per se, but it might mean like a roller coaster, because you went on a roller coaster over the summer. This might be some kind of speedboat that you went on. Maybe this was like a I don't know, like a mining cart. You went through a mining cart, but I'm just thinking of Minecraft. Sorry, about that and how that could be a vehicle, kind of thing, and how you could play around with it. I don't know. There's probably lots of other ones out there. Next one, no fuel. What comes in mind? So pause it. So no fuel means like, well, maybe that means like our body makes it move. You can kind of think of like the Flintstones in a Flintstone vehicle. You could think of like a bicycle. You could think of it's no fuel as no gas, but maybe more wind power or more water power based, more battery power, and think of how that might get you to shift your thinking a little bit in those directions. You can even think of like a riverboat, and how they use water to do the paddles, for steam, kind of thing. It's a fuel, and I get that, but it's meant to get away from the idea of gasoline as being your main fuel. Futuristic, same thing. What are we going to be making on later on in life? You can kind of play around with. You can also Think about, things that are realistic and things that are really far-fetched, in terms of like space travel, or even try to think of how we work with stuff that maybe we're going to start exploring the depths of the oceans that we haven't been able to get to yet. So those are different things you can kind of play around with. And even the past, you can kind of think of, I said the Flintstones before, obviously we didn't have cars like that because it's cartoon based, but what are some vehicles that we did use in our society? When you think of like the horse and carriage, that was one. You can think of like a paddle boat kind of thing. That might have been that might have came up, like back in like the 60s or 70s. You can even think of the classic cars that you might even have a little bit more personal knowledge because maybe you have a relative that kind of collects them. So there's lots of things you can kind of grab um, in terms of working through these kinds of different questions. And this is with any design based project. Okay. Um, and you can kind of look through these as well. It says, what were the designers thinking of? So you have that small one, that little compact car. It says, who is this marketed for? Was it somebody who lives in London or somebody who's lived in Platteville? I don't know how that car would really function in the wintertime in Platteville. I feel like it would get stuck pretty fast. But the streets of London were not designed for kind of two-way traffic for sure, or even like a one-way traffic because they're very narrow streets, because they were designed before vehicles really kind of came in, and you just maybe had a horse, that went through, and maybe a couple carriages, but it wasn't designed for modern day living. And that's one of the things that people who are from like those areas, because of their history and their past, they're not going to want to wipe out the whole town just to make wider streets. They want to save their history. So they have to figure out how they can work with modern technology that fits within the confines of the spaces that they live. As a designer, you have to think about those things as well, in terms of what works really well for inner city, what works really well for rural America, as you kind of play around with it. Next one, you see you have this tank that's right there. So who is this marketed for? Um, and obviously that was kind of for the military. Now this is a futuristic one, so I don't even know if this is like a heavy like solid ammunition or be more like a laser based. And then if you're that kind of a gamer and you've played games like that, there's a whole world of stuff out there you can kind of play with. I know I had one student that made like a tank, and then they made a turret that actually rotated on it. It was kind of cool. So who is this marketed for? So you got to consider your audience as you kind of play around with it. Next one, real slick car, futuristic. We all kind of think that by the time we're adults, that we're gonna have flying cars at that point or self-driving cars. Then reality, comes in and realizes that technology is a lot harder than you think to be able to come up with. But who would this be marketed for? I would say somebody that's probably rich, and maybe some kind of executive of some sort because it's very stylish, kind of thing. Very 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 kind of cool. But you got to think about who you're going to be building something for. This next one, there's a video that you're going to be linked that I want you to watch before you answer these questions because it's a really cool video about how a group of designers try to come and up and solve the issue with if there's a fire in a very busy area like an inner city. How are they going to get a fire truck to that location? Because you got traffic and you just can't pick up vehicles, move them off to the side. So watch that video and kind of answer those questions. What are some strengths and weaknesses in the design? Because there are some of both, and that's part of the design world is that you try to come up with all these really cool ideas, and maybe 9 out of the 10 will fail, but that one, because you go through the whole process of coming up with all these different kind of concepts, one really sticks out and it's like this could actually work, and then you can take off with that kind of thing within your main design. Okay, next part. It says brainstorm technique. Um, there's a PowerPoint that goes along with this. So I'm gonna kind of probably have you go through that PowerPoint and answer it. So it says focus on a different part of the problem. These are your brainstorming techniques. And then the right hand side, it's like these are different problems you could focus on. So again, you think of the vehicle. So you think about windows, more or less. You can think about, if it's military, like shooting an enemy from multiple points of view. And there's a blank one right here that you also need to fill in. So focus on a different problem of the vehicle. So you can pay attention to, like if it's a boat, if you have sails on there, how could you just focus on the sails? If it's some type of spaceship, you could think about how, how's it going to land when it's on Earth? How is it going to fly when it's in the air? So try to think of like break down a vehicle and then see if you can break out little parts here and there you can kind of look at. Do a reversal of the project or of the problem. Same thing as like you ask, it's just another kind of brainstorming technique. You ask why you can't do something, why a vehicle can't be this. Why can't a vehicle look like an elephant? And then you come up with a vehicle that looks like an elephant. And maybe you'll go into a whole different direction than you were kind of thinking about. A lot of times with this stuff is it's really about how you can clear your mind of all the things that block it. And the things that block it are the things that we make these assumptions on stuff. And then you don't get creative because you're kind of limited to just this one idea and you can't branch out from there. Okay. Um, think of the problem from a different point of view. How would a child design a vehicle? How would a geologist design a vehicle? And come up with some other one here. Random word technique. But this one is ask somebody who's sitting next to you or open a book up and just kind of put your finger down and you hit the word balloon and think of a vehicle that you could design based on a balloon. Now, then you can go in the idea of like maybe you could design a hot air balloon, type of vehicle and how you could modernize it. You know, th- just find, I mean, look around and see chair, and maybe chair is focusing on a different part of the problem. You could even kind of think about like how would you redesign the interior of a certain type of vehicle, in terms of how you think it would be kind of interesting. Then you get into like even like limousines, and how their structure is very different in the interior because it's meant to be social. You're meant to be kind of looking at each other, so they have the design that way, because somebody focused on that part of the problem. Okay. Final part. Um, you can draw out your idea here, and then you kind of need to answer these three questions because you have to decide who your vehicle is for. So, what is the audience? And what did you draw in here? What are three things in here that relate to that audience? So, if you make a vehicle for a giraffe, what are three things you're incorporating into this vehicle that a giraffe would want? Okay. If you're making a vehicle for like a plumber, or a teacher, or maybe your audience is for somebody is in the future who lives under the water. And, what are three things that you're focusing in on your design that help you come up with this unique idea? Okay. Um, and then kind of the way things are graded. So again, if you decide throughout this whole process you still want to do that 1967, Thunderbird, um, that's fine. It's completely up to you. It's fun if you can kind of play around and be original on something, but at the same time, if you're hard to set, making some kind of matchbox, style car, then that's good. The next part that I'll be kind of switching over to is the materials that we have, and you can kind of start laying out your project. So otherwise, come up with an idea, come up with a basic drawing, and then let me know what you got.